A man sits in a rented room in Macedonia, the air thick with the dust of the Mediterranean summer, from a group he sarcastically calls the Super Apostles. And on the surface, it does look like a desperate administrative turf war. He has just finished describing the highest spiritual experience a human can have, the vision of the third heaven. And then he says, "Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh." The word our English Bibles soften into thorn is the Greek skolops. It is a word that appears nowhere else in the New Testament, and its classical meaning is vastly more violent than a stray briar in a rose garden. A skolops is a sharpened piece of wood. It is a massive stake. It is the heavy, splintered timber used by ancient armies to build defensive palisade walls, or the jagged spike used to impale a condemned criminal. It is not something you casually pull out of your finger with tweezers. It is something that tears through muscle, scrapes against the bone, and stays there. When you read it as a thorn, you imagine a minor annoyance. When you read it as a skolops, you imagine an execution. The Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament that Paul would have memorized. It uses similar language in Numbers 33 to describe enemy nations as stakes in the eyes of Israel, massive, blinding, existential threats. Paul takes that ancient imagery of a hostile, invading force and places it directly inside his own nervous system. A man losing his grip on his own congregation, trying to convince them he is still in charge. The pain is so severe, so paralyzing, that he literally describes it as an angel of Satan sent to beat him with its fists. That single Greek root changes the entire texture of his struggle. This is not a minor inconvenience God allowed to test his patience. It is a sharpened wooden stake driven through his ego. It is a violent, terrifying grace, designed to keep a man who has touched the ceiling of heaven from floating away into a dangerous, untouchable arrogance. The Corinthians want a leader who floats effortlessly above the dirt, shining with obvious divine favor and prosperity. Paul is telling them he is physically pinned to the dirt by a jagged piece of wood, bleeding out his own pride so that he can actually be useful to God. But even Paul, the man who wrote half the New Testament, cannot bear the crushing weight of it. So he does what any rational human being pinned to the ground would do. He begs. He goes to the God who opens blind eyes, the God who routinely commands disease to leave the human body, and he asks him to pull the timber out. He asks once, he asks twice, he asks a third time, and the answer he gets is a single sentence that redefines the nature of power forever. But if you look closer at the strange Greek vocabulary he chooses, at the bizarre celestial vision he recounts in chapter 12, picture the room in Macedonia again. The dust is still settling. Paul is on his knees in the dirt. He begs the risen Christ to take the pain away. He asks for relief. He asks for restoration. He asks for the one thing every human being asks for when the body breaks down. 3 distinct times. The heavy prayer goes up to the sky. The heavens do not open. The fever does not break. The jagged stake remains exactly where it was driven, into the flesh. God refuses the prayer of his greatest apostle. He does not offer a medical cure. He offers a theological revolution. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. The Greek word for weakness is asthenia. It means frailty. It means a literal lack of bodily vigor. It means sickness, limitation, the humiliating reality of being entirely out of options. In the ancient world, asthenia is something you hide. You cover it with heavy robes. You mask it with loud boasting. You buy expensive letters of recommendation with wax seals to ensure nobody sees your asthenia. But the voice from heaven says, the power is perfected in it. The verb is teleo, brought to its intended finish, accomplished, reaching its final design, at the physical. Humiliating agony he suddenly exposes, you start to see something the standard reading completely misses. The power of Christ does not merely tolerate human frailty. It requires it. Rome builds an empire on military might. Corinth builds a culture on social status. The super apostles build a platform on polished rhetoric. God builds a kingdom on asthenia. He uses the broken thing. He uses the bleeding thing. He uses the man shivering in the cold without a heavy coat. He uses the stuttering tongue. He uses the trembling hand. The weakness is not a barrier to the divine presence. It is the mandatory prerequisite. The grace does not bypass the wound. The grace flows directly through the open tissue. If Paul is strong, if Paul is polished, if Paul is invincible, the Corinthians will praise Paul. But if Paul is a battered tent maker with a stake driven through his flesh, and the dead are still raised, and the churches are still planted, and the world is still turned upside down, then nobody can deny who is actually doing the lifting. When Paul hears this, the entire equation of his life flips. He stops fighting the stake. He stops begging for an escape route. He stops trying to look like a Roman victor. He finally understands what the church in Corinth is completely blind to. 2 Corinthians is not a defense of his credentials. It is a defense of his scars. Paul is not writing a pastoral manual, but knowing the theology of the thorn is one thing. Living with it when the pain flares up again is something else entirely. The ink drying on the papyrus in that Macedonian room forces us into a corner. But here is the part I keep coming back to. Not the massive, unutterable visions of the third heaven, not the blinding light of paradise, but the quiet, devastating moment on the dirt floor when the prayer goes unanswered. And the apostle realizes the stake is not going anywhere, because that is the moment where theology stops being an abstract theory and starts being a mechanism for actual human survival. We spend our entire lives trying to curate a resume of invincibility. We buy into the Corinthian lie without even realizing it, believing that if we just pray hard enough, perform well enough, or acquire enough spiritual polish, we will finally be immune to the brutal friction of the physical world. We want a faith that acts as an impermeable shield against the heavy, jagged timber of human suffering. If you are in a season where you are begging for a removal, this is where you have to sit. Maybe your thorn is a chemical imbalance in your brain that medication only barely manages, leaving you to fight a thick, suffocating fog. He is diagnosing a condition. He is naming a spiritual virus that most modern believers do not even realize they are carrying in their own blood. Every morning, when your bare feet hit the cold floor, maybe it is a deeply ingrained relational fracture that makes you feel humiliatingly fragile. A constant knot of anxiety pulled tight in your jaw. Maybe it is the grief of a sudden loss that sits in your throat like a physical stone, making it hard to swallow, let alone sing in a crowded room on a Sunday morning. You have been praying for the thorn to be extracted. You have been pleading for the scolops to be pulled out of your chest. And when the pain remains, week after week, year after year, you assume that God is distant, or angry, or completely deaf to your voice. The silence is not an abandonment. It is a localized inhabitation. When you bring the risen Christ your most agonizing limitation, he does not always offer a surgical extraction. He moves directly into the center of the weakness. The power of God is not a sanitized force that hovers safely above your trauma, waiting for you to heal and get your act together before it can use you. It is a power that pitches its tent exactly where the tissue is torn. We hide our frailties behind polished smiles and carefully curated digital profiles, terrified that if anyone knew how deeply we were bleeding, we would be disqualified from carrying the heavy weight of the gospel. But Paul's letter completely annihilates that fear. It is a disease that insists God only works through the successful, the wealthy, and the put together. Your weakness is not a liability to the kingdom of heaven. It is the mandatory prerequisite for its power. But to fully grasp how completely this reverses the human pursuit of glory, to see why God insists on using the broken things, you have to step back and look at the entire pattern he has been weaving since the very beginning. The reed pen stops moving. The dust settles in the rented Macedonian room. A scarred apostle hands the heavy papyrus to a messenger bound for the sea. The defense is finished. And when you lay this letter alongside the rest of the ancient text, you realize this is not an isolated incident. It is the rhythm of the entire book. A church demands a polished victor and receives a battered tent maker. An apostle ascends to the blinding light of the third heaven and wakes up pinned to the dirt. A jagged stake is driven into human flesh, and an ego is anchored safely to the ground. A desperate man begs 3 times for physical relief, and heaven answers with the heavy weight of grace. A Roman Empire builds its legacy on unbreakable strength, and a divine kingdom expands through a trembling hand. It is a theology of glory that demands victory and leaves absolutely no room for human frailty. A world insists that power must look like gold and wax seals, and God insists it looks like scars and shipwrecks. A savior dies gasping on a rough wooden beam, and the empty tomb proves that weakness was the weapon all along. Same pattern. Same God. And may the God who has never once been deterred by your fragility move directly into the center of your deepest pain, and build his perfect power out of the very things you thought disqualified you. If this opened something in you, subscribe. Leave a comment, even 1 word helps. Share this with someone who is fighting a quiet, invisible thorn right now and needs to know they are not abandoned. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. To cure them, Paul has to shatter their entire definition of what divine authority actually looks like in the real world. And he is about to do it in a way that would make any self-respecting Roman citizen sick to their stomach, and dictates a letter he hopes will not be his last. You can hear the rhythmic scratch of a reed pen on papyrus. To understand why the Corinthians are so disgusted with Paul, you have to understand the air they breathe. 1st century Corinth is a Roman boomtown, rebuilt from ruins by Julius Caesar just a century earlier. It is a city designed for aggressive upward mobility, situated on a narrow isthmus. It controls 2 massive seaports. You can hear the groaning of timber as slaves physically drag cargo ships across the paved land bridge to avoid the dangerous sea route around Greece. Bronze statues of Roman emperors line the forum. Coins change hands constantly. Corinth is not a city of old money. It is a city of brutal, relentless climbing. In a culture built on climbing, status is the only currency that matters. And in the Greco-Roman world, nothing projects status quite like public speaking. This is the era of the sophists, traveling philosophers and rhetoricians who perform in public squares like modern-day celebrities. They dress in immaculate white robes. They demand exorbitant speaking fees, which only proves how valuable they are. Their delivery is perfectly modulated, designed to entertain, to dazzle, and to project overwhelming personal power. And into this culture of extreme polish, a new group of Christian teachers arrives. Paul sarcastically calls them the Hyperlean Apostoloi, the super apostles. They are not bringing an entirely different theology. They are bringing a more marketable Jesus. He is pacing the dirt floor. He is weeping. He is writing to a city that has shattered his heart. The super apostles have everything Paul lacks. They carry heavy parchment letters of recommendation, stamped with crisp wax seals from important people in Jerusalem, proving they belong to the spiritual elite. They command the room. They boast about their ecstatic visions, their flawless Jewish pedigrees, and their overwhelming success. They look like winners. Paul, by contrast, is a public relations disaster. He refuses to accept speaking fees, choosing instead to work with his hands. In the marketplace, he smells of leather and sweat from cutting and sewing tents. His physical presence, by his own admission, is unimpressive. His speech is plain, and worst of all, he is constantly being beaten, stoned, run out of town, and thrown into dark, damp prisons. The tension in Corinth is not a theological dispute. It is an aesthetic gag reflex. The Corinthians are deeply embarrassed by him. They look at Paul's suffering and they do not see the cross of Christ. They see a loser. They want a leader who looks like a Roman victor, someone they can brag about at the dinner parties of the wealthy elite. They demand proof that Paul is actually an apostle of the living God. They want to see his resume. So Paul decides to give them exactly what they asked for. But the resume he sends is unlike any document the ancient world has ever seen. He is writing to people he loves, people who have recently humiliated him in public, people who are currently being seduced by a new breed of traveling speakers. The wax breaks. The heavy parchment unrolls. The Corinthians read the letters of the super apostles. The ink is pristine. The titles are impressive. The pedigree is flawless. So Paul answers. He picks up his pen in Macedonia to write his own resume. He calls it the speech of a fool. He knows exactly what they want to read. They want lists of miracles. They want accounts of massive crowds. They want proof of his invincibility. He gives them none of it. He does not list his degrees. He does not list his influential friends. He lists his humiliations. 5 times the leather whip comes down on his bare back, tearing the skin, 39 lashes at a time. 3 times the Roman rods crack against his ribs. Once the heavy stones hit his face until he goes dark and is left for dead. 3 times the hull of his ship splinters in the storm. He floats in the black, freezing salt water of the Mediterranean for a night and a day. He is running. He is always running. He walks through flooded rivers. He hides from bandits on the road. He sleeps on cold dirt. He goes days without bread. He shivers in the winter wind without a heavy coat. And underneath the physical trauma, there is a different kind of weight. The daily anxiety for the churches. The crushing, invisible pressure in his chest every time a congregation like Corinth loses its way. This is not a resume of divine favor. These new men have better clothes. They have elite, classical vocabularies. They carry heavy scrolls with wax seals, letters of recommendation written by important men, proving their worth. It is a catalog of human wreckage. In the Greco-Roman world, suffering is proof that the gods have abandoned you. A man who gets whipped by the authorities is a criminal. A man who constantly goes hungry is a failure. A man who survives a shipwreck only to be stoned in the next town is cursed by the heavens. The Corinthians want him to prove his spiritual power. They want him to flex. Instead, he pulls off his tunic. He shows them his back. Picture the thick, white lines of scar tissue crisscrossing his skin. The crooked set of a broken nose. The permanent limp from the stoning at Lystra. He holds up his battered body as the ultimate proof of his apostleship. He looks at the super apostles with their perfect white robes and their wax-sealed scrolls. He looks at a church that has fallen in love with the illusion of invincibility. And he leans into a single, highly charged Greek word. A word that is about to completely dismantle their definition of what God values. To understand what Paul is doing with this brutal list of suffering, we have to look at how he frames it. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 30, right before he unleashes his catalog of shipwrecks and beatings, he sets the parameters for his defense. The problem in Corinth is not theological confusion. It is an obsession with optics. The Corinthians want a leader who looks like a winner. He writes, "If I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness." The word translated as boast is the Greek kauchaumai. It means to glory, to exult, to take visible pride in something. In the ancient Mediterranean, kauchaumai is not just an annoying personality flaw. It is a social survival mechanism. You boast to establish dominance in the loud, echoing acoustics of the public forum. You boast about your wealthy patrons, your elite education, the clinking of gold coins, the purity of your bloodline. It is a word drenched in the pursuit of human glory, a verbal flexing of muscles. And it is no coincidence that this word and its root forms appear more in Paul's letters to Corinth than almost anywhere else in the New Testament. Corinth is a city running entirely on the fuel of kauchaumai. It is the exact same root word Paul uses in his first letter to them, when he quotes the prophet Jeremiah, "Let the one who boasts, boast in the Lord." But here, facing down the super apostles who are weaponizing this cultural obsession against him, Paul does something brilliant and terrifying. He takes their favorite word for dominance, and he attaches it directly to his deepest humiliations. He does not refuse to play their game of boasting. They want spiritual power that looks exactly like Roman power. It is the same human instinct. Century after century, he simply changes the currency. This is not a clever rhetorical trick to win a debate. It is the total subversion of what it means to carry divine authority. So Paul lifts up his brokenness like a Roman victor lifting a laurel wreath. He is forcing the Corinthians into a deeply uncomfortable theological corner. If the super apostles are right, if prosperity and polish are the true signs of God's favor, then Jesus of Nazareth is a failure. You cannot worship a Savior who died naked and gasping for breath on a piece of rough Roman timber, and then demand that your spiritual leaders look like wealthy politicians. But all of this physical suffering, all of this external trauma cataloged in chapter 11, is merely the prelude, because the physical scars on his back are nothing compared to the secret he is about to reveal in chapter 12. He is about to shift from the pain inflicted by the Roman Empire to a much deeper, more confusing agony. He is going to tell them about the pain that came directly from heaven. 14 years earlier, the physical world suddenly falls away. He does not know if he is in his body. He does not know if he is out of his body. He is caught up. He passes the lower sky. He passes the cold realm of the stars. We gravitate toward the polished. We elevate the unbroken. We want a God who makes us look successful. And we want leaders who never bleed. He crosses the boundary into the third heaven. The air is different here. The light is blinding, unshadowed, and pure. He stands in paradise. He hears words that cannot be spoken. He hears sounds a human tongue is strictly forbidden to repeat. The glory is absolute. The ecstasy is total. He is standing in the unmediated presence of the divine. And then he falls. He wakes up. The dirt floor is hard. The air is heavy again. The physical weight of his own humanity crashes back into his chest. And with it comes a sudden, blinding agony. He does not tell us the exact symptoms. He does not name the specific disease. Maybe it is a violent, recurring fever that leaves him drenched in sweat on a rented bed. Maybe his eyes are failing, leaking fluid and sealing shut in the morning light, making him grotesque to look at. Maybe it is severe malaria, racking his bones with uncontrollable shivers. Maybe it is the crushing, suffocating weight of deep depression. Whatever it is not mild. It is a physical, humiliating agony that drops him to his knees in the dirt. He calls it a messenger of Satan. He says it was sent to brutally harass him. But the reason he gives for its arrival shatters the Corinthians' entire theological worldview. The pain does not come because he lacks faith. Most people assume Paul is writing 2 Corinthians just to defend his job title. They read these 13 chapters as a frustrated founder trying to reclaim his church. It does not come because God is punishing a hidden, secret sin. It comes because he has seen too much. The visions of paradise are so vast, so incredibly heavy with glory, that they threaten to completely crush his humanity. Without an anchor, his ego will expand. He will begin to believe his own press. He will become exactly what the Corinthians want him to be, exactly like the super apostles. Arrogant, untouchable, elevated far above the dirt and the suffering of the real world. So heaven sends an anchor. God allows a physical agony to invade his flesh, to keep him tethered to the dirt, to keep him bleeding, to keep him weak. The pain is not a punishment. It is a preservation. He describes this agony with a very specific, violently graphic word in his letter. Most English Bibles translate this phrase simply as a thorn in the flesh. It sounds like a nuisance. It sounds like a tiny splinter you can pull out with a pair of tweezers. It sounds like a minor, irritating inconvenience. But if you look at the original Greek, a thorn is far too small a word for what he is actually carrying. What Paul describes is not a prick on the finger. It is an execution. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7, Paul writes what might be the most misunderstood medical sentence in the Bible.